Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Blackmon. Saturday Down South on this episode. Episode originally going out to our Patreons who have waited a little bit for Fawcett and I get together because he's a very busy man and I am less busy. But nonetheless, got some stuff to talk about. There's a bunch of stuff in our comment section on patreon.com/FloridaBB where people were asking a couple of pretty consistent questions, so I reached out and asked Fawcett when he had time. So we'll start with some kind of roster outlook, minutes distribution type chat. The SEC schedule came out sort of like we know the home and aways now. I have some artisanally, freshly crafted hot takes about some of that. And then, we could kind of get into whatever. But Patreon, always fun to do a show for you listeners, especially in the middle of summer. Fawcett, man, hope things are going good.
Things are good. Team is struggling a little bit in the CBL, but that is the nature of it. But I've been busy with that. There is just tons of Florida content in the league this year. I've already coached against Tyree Samuel, Alex Fudge, Scotty Lewis was in the league for a little bit last year. Osayo Sifo was in the league for a little bit last year. And I feel like I'm missing some guys, but there's all kinds of Florida content in our league. But nice to make a podcast. I was about to say a video for our Patreon supporters because most of the off-season stuff has been videos, and there's still plenty in the queue that will be released. I know we slowed down the pace a little bit, but there is still going to be content, some stuff that is already recorded that we are just making sure to trickle out to you. Don't want everyone to have it all at once, but so it's something that especially I feel in the off season, our Patreon supporters are extra appreciated. And this is the time where I really do feel like the Patreon is the best. Like, I know that some people will subscribe just during the season and our numbers will dip a little bit in the off season, but that's always a little curious to me because the off season is a time where it is much more difficult to get Florida basketball content, and we are keeping it going. So that I really do think this is as great of a time as ever to be on the Patreon. And another thing, if you're looking to fight the off-season blues a little bit, this would be the first off-season really where we had the Discord going. So that's also a great spot to go. And if you need your fix of Florida basketball talk and you want it to be with good, smart people, that are not, the Facebook comment sections or people on Twitter, of which there are some obviously great ones. But it's just like a great concentration of smart Florida fans on the Discord. And there's no one's trolling. No one's out there just trying to piss people off. It is only high level Florida basketball conversation. So that's the other thing too. I know that we still have some supporters that are some Patreon supporters that are not on the Discord. And I know that there is a little bit of intimidation to getting on Discord, and I will admit it because I was in the same kind of boat. But you pick up Discord really quick, and then suddenly it's actually laid out very, very well, and is something that is something that's super fun. So would recommend you all get on that. And with those kind of different channels between Discord, between the comments on the Patreon, we are definitely happy to getting some just different questions. So that'll be really good. And I think one of the things we probably have to start on that wasn't really discussed too much relative to comments, but the news finally kind of came down the last couple days, and it was regarding the 5-5 rule that the NCAA has now put into effect. As predicted, it was immediately faced with all kinds of I was going to say legal challenges. I mean, I suppose there actually has been. I know that there was a judge in Ohio who already kind of addressed some of it, but that is to say that the 5-5 rule is technically in effect next year, which means that players who just finished their fourth year of eligibility do not benefit from this. So, of course, from a Florida standpoint, that is Denzel Aberdeen, who, of course, there was kind of a couple of pathways to him being on the Gators next year. Florida hoped first that he would just get a waiver. Now, I personally expressed my opinion that I did not think that Denzel Aberdeen was going to get a waiver. I will let Neil jump on at some point here, and once I stop ranting, and he can give his piece. But I know Neil maybe felt differently. Florida staff certainly thought he was going to get the waiver. That was one avenue. The second avenue was this 5-5 rule coming in, and just making it that these players like Aberdeen would be able to play. That is not the case at the moment. We'll circle back in a second, and then the other one would be trying to get a temporary restraining order and doing what we are now seeing more and more people do, and go and try to find a favorable local judge to go make things happen in the way that you want. But so as kind of expected, the NCAA passed this 5-5 rule, and then said that players who just completed their fourth season of eligibility would not be would not be eligible for this year. Instantly, there was all kinds of lawsuits. Now, players were already lined up to do this. That is something that the NCAA kind of mentioned a while back that when the 5-5 would be put into effect, that the current class of seniors would not be eligible. A lot of lawyers instantly kind of knew they were about to challenge that. I would say understandably so. These players that just finished their fourth year of eligibility, they missed out on the free year due to COVID. And now they are dealing with this where they do not get their extra year. And it affects a lot of players greatly. Denzel Aberdeen, of course, being one of these players, it affects greatly. But really everyone. I mean, Micah Hanlockton, who went back to play for Florida on the championship run, in part due to the fact that he thought he was going to get a fifth year of eligibility. Just also huge kind of just kind of implications for, really 99% of players who their earning potential is much greater in college than in the professional sphere. I think about that too. I mean, I've got a player on the Edmonton Stingers who is a pro rookie who played his fourth year of college eligibility. He was a mid-major player who was productive. He's also 6'11" and 260 pounds. If he were to go back and play in college, he's probably a millionaire. If he goes and plays in Europe, he's probably making $30,000 this next season. It's just such a massive, the differences are massive. And I feel like, so that could extend to like a Denzel Aberdeen. Could Denzel Aberdeen play in the G League next year? Oh, maybe for, $40,000. If he comes back to Florida, that number's a lot bigger. So because of that, a lot of players were ready to mobilize the moment this went into place. I think a lot of everyone's, which is a funny concept that, it's a funny concept that this exists, but if I were to say the Twitter lawyers that people know, everyone knows who I'm talking about. A lot of those people were ready to roll. And we instantly saw. So Neil, just kind of your thoughts on, it's one of the biggest news kind of in college basketball right now that 5-5 was passed, kind of. It also has an effect on Florida, kind of, as one of the avenues that Florida was looking at as a way that they could get Denzel Aberdeen eligible. But it's also just kind of hard or impossible to talk about Florida's roster and rotation outside of talking about the eligibility or lack thereof of Denzel Aberdeen.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. As somebody that works in the NIL legal space, I mean, there were the usual suspects, as Eric mentioned, were ready to mobilize, period. There are other folks. I have 2 lawsuits right now that we are preparing to file against the NCAA. In at least one of which involves a college basketball player who was denied a medical waiver. The key thing on this stuff is and Eric, the July 31st thing is really fascinating because that's the last chance that people had to file for any of the waivers under the old rules. And then presumably it's 5 for 5. So on August 1st, if you don't qualify for 5 for 5, like you're out of luck. Now Florida, to Eric's point, Florida thought, the easiest way for them to get Aberdeen eligible would have been 5 for 5, and it's retroactive. So you can go ahead and he can play his 5th year. That's not how the rule's going to function, at least immediately. There already, as you see, a lot of y'all saw the Darren Heitner stuff. Like, there's going to be a challenge to that anyway. I don't know how successful that challenge is going to be, quite frankly. I think what's going to be more interesting are, how the NCAA in court explains allowing somebody who's enrolled as a freshman to get the 5th year, but denying it from somebody who has played 4 years. Like those or has played, allowing somebody that's already played 3 seasons, like technically Alex Condon or Thomas Houck, to have a 5th year, but denies it to somebody like Denzel Aberdeen because they've exhausted 4 years. Those are going to be hard things to explain, and I'm sure the crux of the lawsuit will be that. But at some point, a judge might point to predictability and uniformity, and the reason that we need those things is like a justification for some sort of enforcement of the rule that does kind of foreclose pathways for 4-year players. Now, in Aberdeen's case, Florida's best path, or what they feel like was their best path to his eligibility, was his enrollment in school, him being on track to graduate, and essentially just getting a waiver because he played 40 minutes his freshman season. So that sort of pathway is still the pathway that they were relying on anyway. I'm sure it would have been nice to get 5 for 5. If they don't get the extended year of eligibility, then they have very good legal arguments to get a TRO for Aberdeen, which I think they'll pursue in court. I shouldn't even say I think, but it's the most like journalistically responsible thing to say and legally responsible thing to say, because they haven't filed a suit yet and there hasn't been a decision on the Aberdeen waiver yet. But Florida's not going to miss the deadline. That ball's already rolling. That ship has already sailed. So the question really is for Aberdeen is, does he get the waiver? And then if he doesn't, then Florida will, I think, in state court, seek. They'll file a lawsuit. Aberdeen will file a lawsuit. He'll allege the usual things, antitrust violations. He'll allege that the rule as enforced is arbitrary because, and I mean, at least this argument makes intuitive sense to me, and I think is probably what Todd Golden means when he says it's common sense. Like, I don't understand why a player in football can play 60 snaps in a bowl game and play in 3 other games and play like 200 snaps, and they're fine in football. But if you play 1 minute of college basketball, you lose your, like, the arbitrary line drawing on what constitutes an eligible, meaningful competition and what constitutes an eligibility restriction doesn't make much sense. Those are sort of, I think those are arbitrary. And I think that the enforcement of them is thus unequal and inequitable, and I think that Florida has very good arguments that that's the case. If they're inequitable, then they're an unlawful restraint on trade. That's where all the antitrust law stuff comes in. I get asked all the time, what does antitrust law have to do with? It's just that it's a restraint on your ability to make money off yourselves in an NIL market, and you're entitled to 4 years of meaningful competition under the current rules, and the argument would just be that Aberdeen didn't have a 4th year of meaningful competition. Now, the NCAA's typical response to that is like, well, he did, he just wasn't good enough to play. And then, that argument I actually think works to some extent. The problem is that if you're not good enough to play as a freshman in football, you still can get the red shirt, even if you play like 60 snaps in the bowl game. Whereas in basketball, if you play 1 minute, you lose it. So my guess is still that Florida will get Aberdeen in one way or another. But I do think it's responsible to say, like, the way that 5 for 5 is getting implemented reduces at least one pathway for getting Aberdeen on the floor. So now it's, does he get the waiver, or do they have to go to court and get a temporary restraining order? And then if they have to go and get the restraining order, I mean, you saw the comments, or if you didn't see the comments, Scott Strickland, I guess, said, we feel like the whole purpose of the red shirt rule is for people like Denzel. We'll support that pathway if it has to come to that. We hope it doesn't. I mean, that, it tells you that Florida's willing to support any sort of Aberdeen lawsuit. So I guess one way of framing all this is, like, I think you could talk minutes distribution, assuming that Aberdeen's eligible, and understand that this show might be one that you just hit the delete button on in August if there's, a waiver that's denied and a TRO that's denied. Because the thing about the TRO is, like in the Rashawn Agee case, you filed the lawsuit, and then there was the evidentiary hearing on the temporary restraining order within like 4 days, and it was granted, and that was that. He was eligible. And like what happens in his lawsuit, which is still pending, doesn't matter. Puff Johnson, same deal almost. They filed in federal court, then they went to state court after they lost in federal court. But the point is, like, the restraining order is why Puff got to play. It wasn't that he won his lawsuit. So I don't know if any of that's helpful background, Eric, or if it's kind of way more than you talked about as I was messing with my audio.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I guess just my one piece of disagreement, not necessarily with you, but with, I guess, Florida, is like the rules have been enforced the same way largely. And again, that's one thing when there's so many lawsuits in the NCAA, so many people are so quick to be like, oh, well, like this guy got this lawsuit and there's precedent, but there's like the NCAA has not granted waivers in way more of these situations than they have. And maybe you want to use that as one could use that as evidence as why the rule is arbitrary. But I also just like, I don't know, maybe I'm just too dug in, but right from the second it was announced, I said, I do not believe he's going to get a waiver. I continue to think he won't get a waiver, but then of course there's just and to hear this past week, Strickland mention what you said, where he is like, yeah, we're ready to support any way that Denzel Aberdeen might go about, figuring this out. I felt like that was also perhaps Florida starting to see that the waiver is unlikely. And I think that's just kind of hard too, when I know that Florida's kind of company line that you've heard from multiple members of Florida's coaching staff was it's a common sense argument. But like,
right.
I can't say just like, oh, Neil, well, I think Iowa's going to win the championship next year. Oh, it's a common sense argument. Like you can't just like not like, so it's never actually defending the opinion with fact, or it's always just like, oh, you just say it's a common sense argument. And that like, that's kind of which to me also kind of shows that they know it doesn't have actually a lot of footing, is because they keep being like, oh, well, it's common sense. Not because if they're actually to get into the nuts and bolts of like, oh, well, we think you only played this many minutes. Oh, well, that doesn't matter. That the NCAA doesn't look at it. Everything like that. It's I don't think Florida actually has a great case here, and I'll be interested to see. But I've made my personal opinion on how, and again, this is not me arguing whether or not I think he should get one. I'm just arguing based on what I'm expecting to happen. I do think that like the playing 45 minutes over, or 42 minutes, I believe it was, or whatever it was, over a couple of games was not consequential and not really meaning. And again, like talking about what's meaningful competition, about like, if you get 40 minutes of garbage time, throw to 33 game season or whatever, like is that meaningful competition? But just, on the surface, I don't think Florida has a basis. And I'm curious how much Florida just knew that this was going to end up in a local court from the beginning, and how much of it was just like, well, we'll go through the proper channel. But to just every defense I've actually heard from Florida staff about why they think he will get the waiver or should is just been pretty weak. And it's all kind of just it's like, oh, it's common sense. Oh, well, he should get it because it's common sense. If they look at it, it's common sense. Well, you can't just like say that instead of making an actual argument. And it's because I don't think an actual very good argument is there. So with that being said, like I think that it does become a big piece when it's talking about what the rotation is going to look like, because that was Florida's one real opportunity to improve the roster from a team that's returning so many pieces. And I do think it's something that if this doesn't work out, Florida staff would deserve some criticism. They had one opportunity, one big slot, some vacated salary. Of course, plenty of money went to retaining guys, but this was kind of the one starter level position they had to look to upgrade. And they chose to take a guy whose eligibility situation was dubious at best. So I kind of do think that this becomes a big one for Florida staff. And I don't know if other people are going to look at it this way, but if this doesn't work out, like I'm looking at Florida, it's like you had one spot to get better and really quickly in the cycle took a guy who had a really dubious eligibility situation. Like that's kind of a, that wouldn't have been my way of going about handling that. So that becomes very interesting too. And I know people are always talking about like, oh, well, when will Florida hear? There's certainly no deadline to, like, the NCAA is not like, we are going to rule on this case on this day. And then particularly if Florida or if Aberdeen were to not get a waiver, I mean, then the next steps could be, who knows? Yeah. So that'll be, that's the other thing too, is we do not have, we don't really have any roadmap here for when we're going to find out.
No, it is, obviously we talked about like the risk when it happened. And what I would add on that risk is like Florida had all this money for retention. They've got a $20+ million roster. Like they weren't going to pinch pennies over helping the roster out in this spot. So like they made their choice and there was money to be had, like very clearly. They could have figured out a way to bring someone in that didn't have a questionable eligibility situation. So, they're now relying on this season of competition waiver. It's essentially, it's not a medical waiver. It's a meaningful competition argument. Sometimes those get granted. I've mentioned that before. More often than not, they don't. And, I think the best argument is an argument that the NCAA has lost in court a lot about sort of the arbitrary nature of the football rule and the basketball rule. But that's a legal argument. Like, that's not necessarily an argument that the NCAA has to consider when evaluating the waiver, which means that, like, to Eric's point, like, it seems almost more likely than not that Florida's in court to get Aberdeen on the court. And will that work? Probably. Like, I think in court, Aberdeen has, and like, so and these are cases that like I mentioned, one that we're thinking about filing at our firm. I can't get too into the hairy details of it, but like the best cases are when you can argue that it's common sense. Well, that's sort of a legal argument too. Like, that's not necessarily like a NCAA argument, but when you can go to the judge and be like, well, the guy played this many minutes, this football player played 201 snaps, he didn't lose his eligibility. 201 snaps is a lot of meaningful competition. 40 minutes, 16 of which came in the NIT is not, whatever. But all of that's legalistic. Like, we'll see what the NCAA does. Operating under the assumption that he is eligible one way or the other, I think Florida's backcourt minutes distribution, which we get asked about, we really get asked about the front court. Well, we get asked about all of it, I guess, Eric. But the backcourt minutes distribution to me is almost more fascinating because, like, what's the division on the Clavsar Aberdeen thing? To me, like, I think because of Boogie's defense, and Aberdeen is a good defender, but he's not in like the, at least for me, maybe he is for Eric. I don't want to speak for Eric, but I mean, like, it seems to me like your best perimeter defender is Boogie Fland, and he's also your best point guard, maybe your only point guard. I could get into some thoughts I have on Alex Lloyd, and maybe I will. But like, for me, I think you're talking 30 minutes with Boogie, and then somewhere in the 25 range for Denzel and the 25 range for Irby, maybe 20 to 25, depending on the opponent, which really doesn't leave much space for an Alex Lloyd. But I think that was kind of the design when they brought Aberdeen back and built this roster.
I mean, I know you just said you didn't want, like, you want to start with like backcourt, but it kind of to me starts with the frontcourt conversation, because I think it matters whether Hauk is starting at the 3 and playing a bunch of minutes there, or if not, because if you were to truly say what is Florida's best lineup, my prediction would be that it would be Boogie Fland, it would be Denzel Aberdeen at the 3, it would be Urban Klavzar at the 2, or whatever you want to say, sharing the backcourt, and then it would be Hauk at the 4 and Condon at the 5. Like, that would be, to me, Florida's best lineup. I think it would be in closing games in that scenario. So it does kind of start right there, because I do feel like that would be one piece that where I would actually like the play of Aberdeen. And that's something that's also interesting too, is like, and of course it's been fun to watch some of the big 180s. A lot of people were like, oh, Denzel Aberdeen, when Denzel Aberdeen left, it wasn't just like, oh, this guy's, you certainly had some of like, oh, this guy's a traitor, whatever. But then you did have a lot of people that were like, oh, this guy's just not actually good. Like, he's not a point guard. He doesn't do this, doesn't do that. And now that he's back at Florida, it's like a big, and I was someone who was, thought he was a good player. Yeah. I know I'm even just like said it on the podcast when it happened, like, and, I think we are probably early adopters of the Kentucky isn't going to be great if they are spending huge amounts of money on Denzel Aberdeen, because that just wouldn't be the player that I would spend the money that Kentucky did. And I kind of feel like that is because Kentucky looked at him and was like, oh, is this like, this is like a 1-2, like, and we're going to play him with Otega Owe, and these guys will like both hand a little bit. But like, I think that the best Denzel Aberdeen is him as a catch and shoot player and guarding 2s and 3s. So I really do think a really good lineup would be Fland, Klavzar, and Denzel Aberdeen. That would again require Hauk at the 4, which I think he'd be best at, and Con at the 5, which I also think he'd be best at. So to me, that looks really, really good. And that's how I would start and close games. Now, Florida invested pretty heavily in Ruben Chinyelu as well. And I don't know exactly what the thought is going to be, but that's kind of just where my mind immediately goes, because like you said, if it's still we're dealing with 80 minutes at the 1 and 2, and it's going to be, like, I agree with you, I forget exactly what you said, but whatever it was, like, 30 for Fland, heavy for Klavzar, heavy for Aberdeen. There's not really a place for Alex Lloyd. Like, yeah, I would totally agree with you. If suddenly we're going to play a little bit smaller, and it's Hauk at the 4, and maybe Chinyelu's more like 22 minutes, and Florida plays a little bit smaller, and we get a lot more minutes with Isaiah Brown at the 3 and Denzel Aberdeen at the 3, and then you also see a little bit more Alex Lloyd. That would be what to talk about. So I know you said you wanted to just keep it as a backcourt conversation to begin with, but like it all kind of flows to me.
Yeah, of course,
with the front court piece, because one thing I'll add just quick, going back to the 5-and-5 rule. I know I went on the podcast and I made my opinion known about why I thought it would be best for Hauk and Condon and Chinyelu to return to Florida. I feel the exact same way for them returning next season for a 5th year. Like, Hauk, we'll see. And it'll certainly be interesting if Florida still feels like he's worth the massive amount of money that he's going to be paid. And whether Hauk is like, well, now I just have so much money in the bank, I'm just ready to challenge myself in a different way. But like, I made my entire kind of argument largely just based on like earnings, and I tied in a little bit of like what you might enjoy more, and I have no way of knowing what everyone enjoys more, the college lifestyle, the NBA one. But like, it is also interesting, like the exact same arguments I made for why these 3 guys should all be back for this season, kind of like you can kind of make the exact same argument for them next year. So that's also, I just wanted to add with the 5-and-5 while I was thinking about it. But go on.
I was saying, I love that art. Like, maybe it does make a difference for Hauk, but I mean, like we all saw Yaxel Lindenberg last night blow the age argument up pretty quickly, going to Golden State and breaking a ton of hearts in North Carolina, I might add. We'll see. You fools will not sell me on this German kid just yet, okay? But I watched Washington play, and I'm not convinced that this is the answer for the Hornets rebounding woes and all other skilled woes. But hey, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. And I was really hyped about the Christian Anderson pick. So there's your 30 seconds of Hornets talk. But like, you know, and I'm not comparing how Lindenberg is kind of lazy for a bunch of reasons. And I saw a couple analysts do it during the draft process. And I was like, man, that's just kind of funky and a little lazy because I think they're kind of different players. But you know, like Hauk's draft status isn't really going to change too much. Like, could he get to 10 maybe or 9? Sure. Is he going to, but is age going to drop him from like 15 or 16 to 25? No, like it's just not. So like, I think his slot is going to be 11 to 20, no matter what, no matter when he comes out. So it's really just a matter of money. That's my take on that.
Well, and I mean, the only reason you want to get drafted higher is to make more money. Money is not going to be a concern for Hauk ever again in his entire life. If I'm Hauk, I want to get drafted 20th, or maybe I'm exact because you know ego exists or whatever. But like, the argument for him is like, can he go to like the Axel Lindenberg situation? An aging team that needs someone who can play right away. Like, so it's just, that's normally the argument about why a player wants to get from 16 to 10 is to slot to a higher salary spot. Hauk is never going to worry about money again for his entire life. So like, so situation wise, that's why I'm like, even if his draft stock like did take a dip for him, I'd be like, oh yeah, I don't mind that at all. Like, honestly, even if whenever Hauk goes to the draft next year or the year after, he probably doesn't like, he probably shouldn't even go work out for teams. Like maybe he should go and like just go meet with some teams and maybe figure out what he likes and maybe try to leverage his own situation. But like, yeah, so that's just the funny, that's how things change too, where like, again, I even saw some people talking about like some players that stayed back in the draft, not Hauk specifically, but some players who stayed back in the draft back in the NBA this year, NCAA this year, to then go into the draft next year and talking about like, oh, well, next year's a weaker draft. So like, if they were the 13th best player this year, they might go 9th next year. If they were 20th, they might go 15th. And like, oh, and that'll slot them, you know, $400,000 per year more over the next 3 years. And it's like, well, when these guys came back to college for 3, 4, 5, 6 more millions of dollars, like that 1.2 million over 3 years is not going to be a decision maker. So yeah, that is also my thought. But anyways, I know I derailed a little bit from talking about a little like what Florida is going to do with these returning front court players. And yeah, to me, I do think that Florida, and I know this is just, you know, broken record since we've talked about it a bit last year, but as much as Chinyelu is really good, this is no, like, this is not saying that he is not a good player. He's a fantastic player who got very, very good last year. But I just think as a team, Florida is going to get the most out of Hauk if they play him at the 4. They're going to get the most out of Condon if they play him at the 5. And how Florida, if Florida chooses to do that, will be really interesting. And it was, of course, fascinating that the Gators didn't bend all season long. They were just like, they were playing big. They were keeping to their really big lineups. They wanted Hauk to be playing at the 3. And then in the final game of the season against Iowa, they end up playing small, which they had done very, very little throughout the season. So that was probably kind of notable too. And whether or not that informs what they do moving forward, I mean, that's a small sample size. And I don't think that like, if that's the reason you change what you're doing, you're probably like, that probably shouldn't be enough just because it happened to happen in a big moment. Right. But I do also think there's a season long of kind of reasoning why playing a little bit smaller would be better. And maybe now that the Gators have someone who's a little bit more versatile defensively in the backcourt, talking about an Aberdeen for Lee swap, that also just opens up some more versatility where, yeah, last year, especially with how, you know, Lee was playing, and it wasn't like he was a guy who could guard up. So Florida's backcourt rotation just kind of was what it was. Well, the Gators could have some different opportunities with the Denzel Aberdeen, who you'd be a lot more comfortable with in a lot more small forward lineups.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love what you're saying. I love the idea of some Aberdeen at the 3. Also, of course, gives you the opportunity to slot Zay Brown in and play him at the 3 some. With Hauk on the floor instead of having Zay, you know, on the floor while Hauk gets a breather, which wasn't always what Florida did, of course, but it's certainly an option that Florida would have. And then The other point I'd make on that is, well, I guess it's sort of a two-pronged point. One is that Alex Condon mentioned he wanted to play the 5 a little more. And he mentioned that in a couple of, like, it's funny, they did like some videos with him that were on like social media where he was talking about it. And so it's something that he's brought up. He didn't do media availability, but Tommy Houck mentioned it after his media session when I chatted with him a little bit and just said, yo, Condo wants to play the 5 a little bit. So it's out there that Condon wants to slot down and play the 5 a little bit, which presumably would mean Florida would be smaller. And then I guess the B prong of that is, I was on Tobacco Road Sports podcast with some guys in the Raleigh-Durham area and Tyler Hansbrough. And Tyler Hansbrough, brought up this stat and was just like, well, Chinyalu maybe is coming back and like working hard in the offseason to make sure he can stay on the floor more because his on-off splits were, top 5 in college basketball. I think he was the top 5 in the SEC, top 20 in college basketball. And like CBB analytics, like I think he was 3rd in the SEC in on-off splits in terms of like plus minus, right? So I kind of disagreed with Psycho T, which broke my heart a little bit. Like I was kind of like, I feel like the whole point of Chinyalu really is that like because he doesn't have to play 30 to 31, like he can kind of play the way he does. And maybe that's just sort of a naive take by me. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Again, it's purely feel. Like I don't have a boatload of Fawcett data to back up the theory that like a guy that plays the way Chinyalu does is necessarily like there's a sweet spot minute wise. But I don't feel like I feel like if Ruben Chinyalu is playing 22 to 25 minutes, like that's fine on most nights. And like I do think there's some level of diminishing returns just because of how hard he plays defensively in particular. That like I'm not sure like Florida necessarily, he plays 30 minutes now, which is 5 minutes more. So necessarily Florida's on-off splits are going to be equally as good as they were in the 23 point whatever he was averaging last year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I should also add, like, I know I keep saying that, like, to me, the best lineup is Houck at the 4 and Condon at the 5. Like, I mean, there's also certainly a world where Chinyalu beats out Condon, and it's Chinyalu at the 5 and Houck at the 4. Like, to me, the important piece here is like Houck at the 4, and then I think that the discussion around why I would have Condon, but maybe you could make a different argument. Maybe Chinyalu gets better, but like I think it also just comes to like address like last season and like what were the issues. And I know I've said this many times and some people disagree with me, but I just feel like Florida was not good enough offensively. And I know that the numbers still didn't look terrible on that side of the floor, but I also just felt like in Florida's biggest games of the season, their offense was what let them down. And I think part of that was the lineup that they had some players not being optimized. And yeah, I think Florida's better offensive lineup would be Condon at the 5 versus Chinyalu. And I still think that lineup with a smaller front court, which would still have good front court size relative to most front courts, is Condon and Houck. And then I still think that with Fland out there point guard, with Denzel Aberdeen or Isaiah Brown, whatever that kind of ends up being, like Florida would still be a dominant defensive team if the starting group was Condon and Houck. But I do think it would be better offensively. And to be honest, I think that, yeah, even if Chinyalu was out there at the 5 and it's Condon on the bench, even with that smaller lineup, like it's still leveraging Houck more offensively. It's still probably going to space the floor better for everyone else. So there's still even a chance that if you play Chinyalu at the 5, Houck at the 4, you're still a better offensive lineup. So yeah, that's still kind of the piece I should add. I know I was mentioning that, like, to me, it would be Condon I prefer and Chinyalu on the bench, but like, yeah, there's someone could certainly make an argument that it would be best with Chinielu at the 5 and Condon coming off the bench. And that would be that'd be fun too. It would make the probably SEC 6th man of the year voting a lot easier. So, but yeah, that's kind of my big kind of question going into next year. And also just wondering how Florida's staff looked at the season and the shortcomings and how much of that they're looking to change versus running it back and seeing if they can improve on some things on the edges and just presume they're going to shoot the ball better, which is probably a safe assumption, and go from there.
No, and I do think they do assume they'll shoot the ball better, and I think there's at least some merit to that. Like AJ Brown will get some minutes, I do believe, or CJ Ingram will get some minutes, and both those guys, CJ showed some improvement shooting, and I'm sure as a sophomore, you would think that he'll at least stay where he is. If he drops a percentage point, then he's still going to be looking pretty good from deep. He only took 16 last year, but he made half of them. Alex Lloyd is a guy that is interesting to me if he does get on the floor. A lot of that is, we've already talked about it, kind of Aberdeen adjacent and Alex Lloyd dependent. Like, the kid is a bucket. He looks great in workouts and practices. He's figuring it out defensively. I know they want him to play point guard, and to me, like, the thing I think is weird about Lloyd is, like, I see him more as like a Klavzar-ish type player where, like, I would run him off screens and just, like, that shot looks so nice. Like, I'd get him that, and then if you do play him, if you need, like, you don't need him in the pick and roll as much, in my opinion. Like, I think you can use him off the ball, space him, get him catch and shoots, and if you do want him going downhill, because he's athletic, he can, but do it in your, like, gut dribble handoff, like, stuff where he just comes rolling around a screen, gets a head of steam downhill and attacks one of those seals, where the Florida bigs can kind of seal it off. Like, that to me is a more effective long-term plan for him. Maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe he'll develop into the point guard that they think he is. And, and again, like, it worked for them with Walter Clayton, so maybe they can figure it out with Alex Lloyd, who obviously was a much higher recruited level of player than Walter Clayton. But, I don't know. Like, I think almost a more productive use of Lloyd, if they have to use him next year, would be at the 2. Maybe they won't do that, but that seems to make a little more sense. Didn't think I'd spend a ton of time on him on this show, but, like, when you're looking at the sort of division of minutes, Xavier Lee played 68% of Florida's minutes last year, so you're going to replace those. And beyond that, like, you had Urban Klavzar at about 20 minutes per game. I don't think that changes a ton. You had Condon at about 27.5 per game. Obviously, you have, Tommy Houck playing over 30 minutes per game. That's not going to change. Chinielu played 61% of Florida's minutes. I honestly, like I said, I've been on the radio talking about how that should stay the same itself. I don't think that's going to change. So you've got really minutes for Micah Handnockton, which was 36% of Florida's minutes. And what do you do with the Handnockton minutes, right? Like, that's an area where you have some to give around. Are those going to go to AJ Brown, or is Florida going to play smaller? Like, how do they use those minutes? But I've seen people saying, I think Florida could play 9 or 10 with their rotations. And one, I just don't think that's really what happens in modern college basketball. Even Gonzaga has kind of shied away from playing 10, some. And, I think, I do think that there's some merit to what Fawcett was saying. Like, it was interesting to see Florida play smaller when a coach, now obviously a great coach, but a coach had an idea of how to make it essentially a 4-on-5 game when Florida had the ball, right? Like, they completely took Ruben Chinielu out of the game. And so Florida was forced to try to figure out how to score with 4 guys on the floor, and it wasn't until they went smaller that they were able to make a big run and take the lead in a game they, clearly should have won. So I think, these are all interesting questions as it relates to minutes distribution, Eric.
Yeah, and I do think with the front court and who's the next piece, like this is the time to talk about Doman Petrovic, who Florida, I would say, is paying to play. And this is a guy that's 23 years old, so this is not like a developmental piece. We'll see what happens in the long run. They paid him a decent amount, not like marquee amount, but like they paid him like someone they are expecting to play, and they got this done months ago. So this is not like this was not like last minute, let's try to batch it. Like this was a guy that I identified a long time ago. So that'll be something that's kind of interesting, is like this is someone who I also feel like brings a completely different element for it, if to really kind of generalize, like he's your stretch four. Like I think he's got a lot of skill with the ball in his hands, but he's someone who I really think could only play the four. Don't want him to play the five. Don't really want him playing the three, but can still handle the ball really well for a four, and shot the ball at a really high level in Slovenia. So that's also like a piece that I think would be a really nice kind of change up to the other front court pieces. And if it is something like 30 minutes for Hauk and 25 for Chanielu, 25 for Khan, and there's just like 10 minutes there, like that's where like Petrovic would round out the front court rotation to me. I guess this would also be the time to talk about Arturas Budievas, who is not someone that I see as much as someone who could contribute right away.
I don't either.
Though, I'll say I recorded, so it'll sometime in the off season. There'll be a video on the Patreon where I watched some film of him at the Adidas Eurocamp, which is really good event for a lot of really top European players. And it was a good kind of example of both just like, well, it was just a really good look at what like Arturas Budievas is, which I know a lot of people got really excited for him right away. Some probably over the top in my opinion, but like to me, I know some people are like, okay, well, what's the comparison? Like, I guess to me, it would be like getting, I'm probably to get myself in trouble just trying to make a prediction like this to me. But like, I look at him and I'm like, if this was like an American born player and was a traditional high school player ranked like 50th, that's kind of what I see from him. So much like if the Gators got an American front court player that was ranked like 55th, you're like, okay, this guy like could probably play, but like probably won't, especially if given what Florida's returning. So it's also a good reminder too, that Florida's like, everyone often views European pickups like they're all the same. And this is just a perfect example of why they are not. Budievas is a high school player. His age is that of an incoming freshman, and he should be viewed that way. Petrovic is a 6-year pro in Europe, and I think will be 23 years old at the start of the season and should be viewed like a graduate transfer. So Petrovic would be the guy that if we're looking for like, who are the kind of incoming pieces to make an impact. I know I got asked the other day about AJ Brown. I think people will remember my AJ Brown takes when the Gators got him, and that I didn't think he was someone who would be able to contribute. Yeah. Now he hasn't played for a year. I mean, who knows, I guess, but yeah, just kind of going to like what there any kind of changes in the rotation. Like I would go Petrovic, but again, that would probably rely on, and that's still on the basis that Hauk is playing a lot of minutes at the 4. Now Hauk starts playing a lot of minutes at his 3. Suddenly we could be seeing a lot of Petrovic, which is maybe what the Gators had actually in mind, because like I said, the Gators had this deal done a long time ago when they were loving the 3 bigs thing all the time. Yeah. So they probably thought, okay, even if we return some guys, we're going to need some more front court. But yeah, even if Hauk is playing all his minutes, I could still see 10 minutes for Petrovic at the 4. And if Hauk ends up playing some of his minutes at the 3, I could see Petrovic being a player that plays, a decent amount in the rotation. And that's just another plug here. If you haven't watched the Patreon video of Doman Petrovic, I went into his game and why I think that he is someone who's just ready-made to come in and be a piece off the bench.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up, because he's more of the, if you guys need like a more relatable type, I guess. What's a relatable? Oh, he came from Europe comp. Like the easiest thing to do is to like say that Petrovic is more of like the Illinois European who like is going to come over and contribute. And it's just a matter of whether those minutes escalate or kind of stay steady. And yeah, I mean, Budievis he's a project is probably a little harsh. That's more of a Jones Lay label. Like you watch Jones Lay and it's like he does absolutely nothing on film for like 14 minutes. And then all of a sudden there's like a chase down block where it's like ridiculous athleticism. And you're like, whoa, that was cool. And then he does nothing for like 7 more minutes. And then like there's a rim run dunk, right? And you're like, whoa, that was cool. Yeah, Budievis a little more consistent on film. But I love the like, hey, top 50 kind of player comparison. Like there's a long arc for him. He's definitely a guy that will be in the program and they hope to develop. I don't think he's a guy who's going to contribute on this team next year. You know, maybe if you weren't a team that had Alex Condon and Ruben Chiniolu and Thomas Houck already, then, you know, sure, he gets some run, but it's the best front court in the country, and they're probably not going to, you know, be relying too much on a 19-year-old Lithuanian to play impactful minutes. I did kind of tease this because this starts on the Patreon. 2 Patreon videos that are coming up, by the way, are the Budievis video, and then Fawcett did a video on Tommy Houck as a driver. There's also one old cut from last year, which I waited and sat on, and I apologize to everyone for like sitting on this. It's been in like the dust off the archives for a while. But essentially what happened is last year, Fawcett did this video on Dave Klatsky's offense at NYU. And then Todd Golden was like, I'm going to call plays this year. And I was like, okay. I don't know if that's going to happen this year. I think we might be sneaking into John Andrzej's second-year assistant territory, where now Todd's like, I trust this guy. Oh, by the way, Dave, it's your offense. And then him and Sapphire take over on the defensive side, or just Sapphire does, which I'm fine with. So we're going to drop the Dave Klatsky NYU stuff because I think Florida's going to like play out of their what they call playing out of open. They're going to do that a little bit less at times this season and try to run a little more offense in the half court, especially now that they feel like Boogie Fland is healthy and comfortable, you know, and had a full off season for the first time in 2.5 years. They feel pretty confident in where he's at. So the Klatsky one also coming. So 3 Patreon videos coming up in addition to this podcast.
Wow, that's an amazing throwback. I do remember doing that video. So, and I really liked how his teams at NYU played. So, and again, that just shows a little bit of how kind of strange it was at the moment, where I almost think it was announced that he was going to be the offensive coordinator, and then it kind of at the jump, and then it kind of changed. But whatever the case may be, that's like, hey, nice resume piece for Klatsky, because Florida's defense was really good last year. I thought it was well ahead of the offense, but yeah, just seeing how those NYU teams played, how Colgate played when Klatsky was there, I would love an interjection of that to Florida. And I do think that Florida needs to change up what they're doing on that end. I've said that for a while now, so don't need to belabor the point now, but it would be interesting to see those changes. And I do think a big piece of that would be if it's going to be Condon at the 5 a little bit more, and Florida playing a little bit differently there. That's already a start for how things could be different.
And then the last thing we wanted to talk about on this show was SEC schedules are out, sort of. Don't get, I saw people irritated about no home and home with Kentucky. I think that's over after this year. I can tell you that Garth Glissman and the SEC Commissioner's Office, I think they do a pretty good job considering the demands of scheduling an 18-team schedule in the era of expansion. I think it's really hard. But Florida only went up to Rupp 2 years ago, the first year they did it. So they're returning the favor to Florida this year. That's why there's only one Florida-Kentucky game. Judge that all you want. I've also heard Florida people say that Florida's home slate is stinky or that it's not great. I don't agree. Like, I had Vanderbilt in my preseason top 16. They're coming to Gainesville. I had Texas in my preseason top 16. They're coming to Gainesville. I had Texas A&M as number 25 in my preseason top 25. they're coming to Gainesville. Now, I reserve the right to alter the Texas A&M thing if their G League player doesn't get eligible. Then I think they're kind of they'll still be fine. He's not going to be eligible, but assuming he is, actually shouldn't have put him 25. Thinking of that as I talked myself through it, but they're still coming to Gainesville, and I think that's a fun game. So there's plenty on the home slate. Oh, by the way, Duke is coming to Gainesville. Like Florida will be just fine, but in terms of like the league play, let's just be honest about it. Like Florida had kind of a soft path last year in a conference that wasn't as good. I think the SEC is going to be much better this season as I look at the SEC vis-a-vis other leagues. At a minimum, the SEC is going to be old this season, which was a good formula for the Big Ten last year. And I think will be a good formula again. I love what Texas did in the portal. I love what Vanderbilt did in the portal, as usual. I think there's multiple really good teams in the SEC. I don't know if there's like 2 top 8 teams in the SEC. Again, that I think to me will kind of depend on Texas. But the point is, the SEC is going to have 7 or 8 ranked teams all season long. And Florida had the softer path last year. This year they get a tougher one, right? Now, I told you, I promised hot takes. I think Alabama's going to be good. I don't think they're going to be great. And like going to Tuscaloosa hasn't been a big deal for Florida. And by the way, Alabama didn't do much roster-wise to like deal with what Florida does. Like it's a problem for Nate Oates. I think it continues. Auburn, I'm not sure they got any better. Like, I think addition and subtraction were kind of equal. Well, that's another one of Florida's road games, right? LSU, like I have no earthly idea who's going to be eligible, but there's a decent chance they stink.
They're gonna either be the other two, like they're gonna be the second top 8 team, or they're gonna be 85th in Ken Palm. Because I either feel like I don't like I hate to be the like I know right now the World Cup is going on and you're seeing the worst of people who want to like pretend they know about European sport and they're out there, and I know I'm kind of like that for basketball, but like I don't think people realize if all these guys get eligible, LSU is winning the national championship. Like they're the players that they have committed are insanely good. Now I don't think they're going to get eligible, and I think they're going to get left with a roster that is going to be 85th in Ken Palm. But like that's just what's crazy is like there's not really like a middle ground, because I also kind of feel like all the guys are going to get eligible or none of them are, because they all kind of have the same case. Now, again, it gets very complicated as we get into the various youth development systems they went into, but like that's what's just interesting to me about LSU. And I'd also like to add about the ACC SEC challenge. It's in like this kind of like weird spot where like they kind of make good matchups, but they also don't. Like on one hand, I kind of wish that they just straight up were like, hey, whatever you finished in the league last year, let's line them up 1 to 16, and we just seed it, and 1 plays 1, 2 plays 2, etc. I actually wouldn't mind if they did that. I know it wouldn't be the most accurate because that's looking backwards instead of projecting out, but it would still be interesting. They're in that kind of like weird spot where they they kind of reward big programs. They kind of try to make interesting games. We saw that with Florida getting Duke. Like Florida was thrown a bone, but like I kind of want them just lean all the way into the bit. Them not sending LSU to NC State is just like that. Like that was a layup for something that would have been hilarious to make Will Wade and LSU go to NC State. So I kind of just wish if they were going to do the like let's make for interesting games.
Yeah,
they're kind of 1 foot in, one foot out. Like we do see Duke at Florida, which is like 100% a nod to that, but it's like let's make some more interesting games. But yeah, I just will also say if LSU gets these guys eligible, which I really don't think they do, like they could win a national championship. Like they are trying some preposterous things to get in some insanely good players.
Yeah, I mean, these are some strong ass reaches that they're taking, and RJ Lewis is not going to be eligible. Yamadar, who was a second-round draft pick of the Boston Celtics in 2020, and it's awesome, by the way. It's absolutely awesome. Could like be National Player of the Year if eligible. It is not going to be eligible. Like it's there's some crazy stuff going on there, but Yeah. Now, do I think that there's a chance that everyone but Madar and Lewis is eligible? Yeah, I think there's a chance. I do. I don't know if that makes them like an NCAA tournament. Like, I'm not sure where that puts them because, like, I feel like Lewis and Madar are kind of like what would be like linchpinning that. But there's still other guys that they've added to Fawcett's point that like would all be really great complementary players around those two, if that works. The point is, like, at LSU isn't going to scare Florida unless like they have Madar and Lewis, and they're not going to. So, you know, my point is like all of this is pretty manageable. Like, do I think Texas is going to beat Florida and Austin? Absolutely. Like, book that. Place your. We don't do any. We have no gambling promotions right now. I shouldn't say we don't do them. We did them for a couple times, but yeah. Like, I'll pick Florida to not go 18-0 in the SEC no matter what, and like I feel like the Texas game is one they'll lose. But I'm excited to see, like, you know, the Texas front court and David Punch and those guys in Florida square out. Like, it's going to be fun. Like, so this is great. This SEC schedule is great for Florida. And that's kind of my overarching hot take on scheduling. We'll see how it all like breaks down. But like the SEC, Garth Glissman does a great job of listening to people. And I think that's good. Like, he kind of gives the people what they want. So like when he sees Florida fans complaining about their home slate, to me, like, the response to that is like, you know, Texas and Vanderbilt are going to be weekend home games. Like, they're not going to put those on a Tuesday night for Florida. So like, I don't know. I think it'll be pretty fun either way, Fawcett.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's interesting that you said that Garth Glissman gives the people what they want, because we're at the point now where like I don't know what I want from a conference schedule, if that makes sense, because it used to be that you wanted parity from a conference schedule, and that's the reason you play in a conference and you have standings. Like, you know what, like, for lack of a better term, like there's times for like weeks of the season where I just didn't even look at the standings because you have these insanely unbalanced schedules. And most teams care about the NCAA tournament more than they care about their conference. And this is not, right. This isn't just an SEC thing. Like, to be clear here, like, it's just now that we're in the era of these massive conferences where you're playing incredibly unbalanced schedules, it's really interesting because when this happened, I was like, man, fans are going to be so mad about like people are going to be so upset at these unbalanced schedules, and they're going to be calling out teams for being fraudulent left, right, and center. And they're going to be calling out these unbalanced schedules like crazy. And no one does. And it's crazy because like every time, like every league you can look to and be like, oh my goodness, the league unbalanced schedule played an huge role in the regular season standings, which ultimately play a big role in conference tournaments. And it's just really interesting that like people just don't care about it in a way that I never expected. So I guess like for me, like I just like the idea of having like a fair or somewhat like a schedule with any kind of parity for multiple teams, like there's just no way. It's completely out the window. So on the other hand, I'm like, well, like I almost feel like it should be almost like non-conference scheduling where Todd Golden should be able to say like, hey, you know, this year I'd actually really like a really challenging schedule. And then he'll schedule in the non-conference accordingly. And then Auburn can be like, or that's not a good example. Like Ole Miss could be like, hey, by the way, I actually want, you know, I'm going to schedule pretty soft anyway. So like, can you give us a more challenging schedule? Or Alabama can be like, oh, I'm going to schedule really challenging. Like I always do. Can we get because it's also like these teams want different things from the SEC schedule, which is just like bizarre. And it's a long way from like the Big 12 playing a true round robin and everyone plays everyone home on the road. Like, we're so past that I don't even know what I want the schedule to be. And therefore, like, I just like don't even, and again, even when Florida had like, and I was one of the first people to call out, I thought Florida had a really soft schedule last year. Yeah. And like no one around the SEC cared. Like I was waiting for everyone around the SEC, fans of other schools, to be like, wow, do you see Florida caught every break in the schedule? And no one said anything. So it's just like, man, in our world that everyone is so contentious about everything in college sports and everything is a perceived slight, everything is a program getting screwed. For somehow schedules are like invisible to people. And so that's just like, I don't even know what I want from the schedule, because we're just so past the standings of a league actually really meaning anything. I know that you and I will still go up and we'll like throughout the season, we'll talk about SEC standings, but like really those standings don't really mean a lot because they are so heavily affected by the unbalanced schedule of the league. And so that is my like long kind of rant there where I'm like, I like you could like they could have announced any schedule for Florida and I would not have cared. I will also be honest. I saw when John Rothstein broke it or tweeted it or leaked it, whatever word you want to use. I didn't even look, like I was like half busy at the moment. And I was like, I didn't even look at it. I didn't care. Cause it's just, it's where we're like, we're just in a post-conference world where these things exist, but the standings are so weighted by the schedule you get, which maybe that means I should care more. But it's just like because I just know that there's going to be other teams in the league that are screwed, other teams that also got a break, and like I guess it's going to balance out in some way. And then there's also just the piece that you never know, which you as much as we think we do an okay job at predicting teams. We are never going to be perfect. And it's, there's not a lot of people expected Vanderbilt to be what Vanderbilt was. And, there's always going to be just teams that what we think could be and it's also funny because we thought Florida's schedule was going to be soft and somehow it became even softer relative to what teams weren't up to what we did. But that's just like, we can't get bad. And that's just the nature we now live in with the big conferences.
Yeah, man, that's so true. And by the way, like, I don't think anybody knows what they want. Because, like, if I was Arkansas fan, like, I would have been annoyed. Like, they get Alabama at home, and then their other big home game is Florida. And then otherwise, like, they have Ole Miss, they have Georgia, they have Oklahoma, they have, like, Missouri. Like, it's just kind of like, man, like, I would have been annoyed. And Arkansas fans are like, this schedule is great. So I think it's just kind of a universal feeling.
Yeah. Actually, just one more piece that I actually do find interesting. It's also like, it's interesting that because of the way that teams just schedule, I'll say smarter now, and the way that the net is the way that it is, like Florida doesn't play any good non-conference games at home. Well, other than now they got Duke in the ACC SEC challenge, but like it's interesting too, because probably even like 7 or 8 years ago, a Florida season ticket holder, someone who goes to a lot of games would probably be like, oh, well, like whatever happens in the SEC is great. Would love there to be Kentucky because that's always fun. But like, hey, we're going to get a couple of big games in non-conference where like now, like you just like especially for I'd be interested to know what someone trying to like sell Florida season tickets would be like. But like now I guess it does matter a little bit more in SEC play because there isn't a whole lot to be excited about in the non-conference season other than I guess this is probably going to be there's probably people buying a season ticket just to be able to go see Duke. So that changes things, but that's also just like an interesting element to this where I actually do feel like people care. And this is anecdotal, but I wonder, I guess I should more just like theorize than say, I do wonder if people care more about Florida's home matchups because there's not marquee non-conference matchups a lot of the time now to get excited about. And now it's like, we like you, if you're a season ticket holder, someone who wants to go to games in Gainesville, like you kind of need the big matchups to come from the league.
All true. So that's our show. Thanks to our guys at Game Time Sidekicks. I got this National Champions one here. This is actually pretty nice. It's huge. Go over to Game Time Sidekicks, and if you order and spend, $50 or more, you can get your shipping for free. If you spend $60, you get a free skinny can to your cart. Any school you want. I mean, most of you are going to get Florida, but I pointed out over and over that they pretty much have every power league now and some non-power schools. Like I saw some pretty sweet A10 ones up the other day, and I was like, man, these are deep cuts. So anyway, go over to Game Time Sidekicks, check out that stuff. Subscribe to our show, patreon.com/Florida BB Hour, patreon.com/Florida BB Hour. 3 different tier levels. You'll get all of the content that we referenced on the show tonight, plus the whole archive becomes available to you once you become a member. It's still the best way to support the work that Eric and I do. which, as you can see, since we're doing a show in late June, continues throughout the year. And these exclusive shows, this won't drop as a pod for another 5 days. Like, it's going to stay exclusive to Patreons, and we're going to keep a lot of podcasts that way too. So thank you guys for subscribing. Catch some Edmonton Stingers hoops. Let my guy Eric sign us off.
Go Gators and keep attacking closeouts.